Hello everybody, it's Gideon Nieuwberg from Paratus, and today I quickly want to talk to you about numerical limits regarding the number of firearms you are allowed to own, or rather arbitrary numerical limits. And when I refer to arbitrary numerical limits, I specifically refer to the previous attempt at a Firearms Control Act amendment bill that we saw in 2021, that due to overwhelming public rejection of that proposed amendment was sent packing back to the drawing board, where it has languished ever since, and we haven't seen it again, although there are rumors of it making a reappearance potentially this year. In what form it will reappear, I don't know and I can't tell you. However, if it's as silly as the previous one, where amongst other things it tried outlawing self-defense as a valid reason for owning a firearm in the Republic of South Africa, the second most homicidal nation on earth, it also imposed a strict numerical limit on the maximum number of guns you are allowed to own, and I think it pegged it, I speak under correction, at about 4 long guns only. Now, whether or not that is entirely correct is actually irrelevant to this discussion, and you'll soon see why, but it imposed an arbitrary hard numerical limit. The reason why I use the term arbitrary, as in referring to it as being nonsensical and irrational, is for you to understand why it's arbitrary. Is you need to understand a little bit about how the Firearms Control Act of 2000 actually works in governing the number of guns people are allowed to own and what they can own. Now, if you're ordinary Joe Soap off the street, you can own a maximum of 5 guns under the FCA, which is 1 firearm under Section 13 for self-defense, and 4 firearms under Section 15, which is occasional sport shooting or occasional hunting. That can be, if you already own a handgun under Section 13, you can get 1 more handgun under Section 15, and 3 long guns. Or they can all be long guns, whether they're manual action rifles or manual action shotguns, it doesn't matter. The only thing you're not allowed to own are semi-automatic long guns, like a semi-automatic rifle, because those fall into the restricted category of firearms, and you need dedicated sports status for that. Now, I know that the collectors also exist. I'm keeping the collectors and the restricted Section 14 firearms for self-defense out of this discussion, because I want to keep it narrow without getting too diverted by those categories. I'm really just talking here about the average normal person who's not necessarily going to become a firearm collector due to many reasons and possibly personal restrictions they have preventing them from doing that. And that the best that they can hope for is achieving Section 16, which is dedicated status. So without dedicated status, you're limited to 5 firearms. With dedicated status, that limit falls away completely. There is no numerical hard limit on the number of firearms you can own as a dedicated hunter or a dedicated sport shooter, and therefore no hard limit on the number of firearms you can license under Section 16. There's nothing in the Act that stipulates black and white, you are only allowed to own X amount of Section 16 firearms. However, what people kind of forget, and I think what the authors of the previous amendment either were unaware of, or they forgot, or they were just malicious gun grabbers that wanted to limit the amount of guns you can own because they're paranoid about people legally owning guns, and a little bit more on that in a moment, is that the registrar of the Central Firearms Registry retains an extreme and astronomical amount of power and say regarding how many firearms you are allowed to own for each individual firearm license. So each individual firearm you own, whether it's 1, whether it's 5, whether it's 15 or 20, you need to motivate a need for each of those in the initial license application. Meaning you need to write a motivation letter with supporting documents explaining what you intend to use this firearm for, why you need it, and why the guns you already own are not suitable for the stated purpose for which you are presently motivating. That application then goes via your designated firearms officer, DFO, to the Provincial Firearms, Liquor and Second-Hand Goods, where the Provincial DFO sits, and from there it goes to the Central Firearms Registry in Pretoria. If it's a restricted category firearm like a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun, the register themselves has to sign off on the approval or denial of the license. What happens in this process is your supporting document in your application is assessed, and if it is deemed that you have motivated a legitimate need for the firearm, it is approved. or a legitimate need, and there are no other disqualifying factors to your application or to your person. If, however, there are disqualifying factors to your person, as in you've recently obtained a criminal record that disqualifies you, or you've committed some sort of fraud regarding licensing, or have otherwise lost your competency, or have been declared unfit to possess a firearm, or if your motivation wasn't good enough, and we've seen this time and time again, your application will be rejected and you will be refused the license. So there is already a system in place that judges each individual application on their individual merits. How this then plays out further downstream is when you have to renew the license. Now bear in mind, a Section 15 license is valid for 10 years. A Section 16 license is valid for 10 years. That means from 10 years of you initially being issued the license, you have to renew it within 10 years. Actually, technically within 9 years and 9 months for the 3-month, 30-day period. But you have to renew that license, motivating again that you have used it for the intended purpose, that you are continuing to use it for the intended purpose, and provide proof of your participation in the activities, or proof that you've maintained your dedicated status through the accredited association you are associated with. The other safety net here is the fact that the accredited association who is providing you with the dedicated status and the endorsement letters for your firearm also checks up on your status as to whether or not you're participating in, at the very least, in the bare minimum of annual activities you need to participate in to maintain your dedicated status firstly, and whether or not you're genuinely participating in these activities, or whether or not you're only participating in them when you have to apply for a license or apply for a renewal. These things are picked up on, and people are denied their dedicated status or their endorsements for firearms if they are trying to game the system. That safety net's already in place, and it's already happening. Bearing in mind that it's a small number, a bare negligible percentage of a sub-percentage of people, of outliers, that actually try to game the system. The majority of people that actually have Section 16, whether it's dedicated sports shooting or dedicated hunting, hold that status legitimately. They put in the necessary work to do it. There's also not that many of them because, believe it or not, dedicated hunting and dedicated sports shooting is an expensive activity. It's not just a hobby, it's an interest. Which again pours kind of cold water on the idea of, okay, this arbitrary hard limit, you're only allowed to own this many guns. I have not yet been able to drill down into what is the concern behind it, what is trying to be addressed by applying an arbitrary hard limit. The one thing that seems to come up a lot is, we don't want people stockpiling guns under Section 16. And I go, well, how would they do that? And what's wrong with it? If they are bad actors that are stockpiling the guns for bad reasons, well, there are better ways for them to get their hands on a stockpile if they have criminal or terrorist intent than trying to license it through the Firearms Control Act, and there being a paper trail on their ownership of these guns and the process that they have to go through to get these firearms and keep them. But let's say that's your concern. You're worried about these people stockpiling guns for bad purposes. Right? That's a task for crime intelligence to drill into and prevent that from happening. The other one is, their guns might get stolen, and then if a criminal robs their house, they can get away with 10 or 15 guns that this guy has, as opposed to just maybe 4 or 5. The thing is, the criminal doesn't know, unless he's got inside information, what you own, and inside information coming from the CFR, what you own, how much of it, and where it is. Guns stolen in suburban, urban, or rural robberies are stolen by chance and purely randomly. It's not like you have a bunch of people with a whole bunch of guns that are geographically concentrated in one area and you can just rob them one after the other. That's not how this type of crime works. So that's already a nonsensical issue. And even if one of these outlying individuals should be robbed, the number of guns that's added to the stockpile there is negligible. And again, we're shifting the blame and the responsibility for maintaining the safety and security of citizens of the Republic and fighting crime from the police, who are not doing their job, to civilians who are now not allowed to own certain things because the authorities feel that the civilians are going to be a source of something for criminals. That's not how the causal direction work or should work. So the bad people aren't stockpiling guns by abusing Section 16, and if they are, that's entirely detectable, right? And if it's not being detected, it means the authorities are not doing their jobs. The people who are stockpiling guns, in theory, aren't a source or supplier to criminals unless the police are supplying the criminals with information who these people are and where they live, and again are not intercepting these groups as is a function of the police and their crime intelligence service in order to keep us all safe. So that's, again, it's a policing failure that's now becoming our problem. So those two I don't think are valid reasons at all. The third one being the fact that how many people can truly afford to stockpile all these firearms. We've mentioned the cost of participating in Section 16 activities. You have to participate in a minimum number of sanctioned activities through your accredited association every year. That means shooting out a fair amount of ammo, means practicing fairly regularly, which also shoots out a fair amount of ammo, which is expensive. And every single gun you purchase is going to cost you between a minimum of 10 to 20,000 Rand. So if you've got a stockpile of 10 guns, that is going to be at least 100 to 200,000 Rand minimum, excluding accessories and ammunition, that you have tied up in firearms alone. Our household incomes in South Africa just aren't that robust that a large number of people can afford to do this or would see sense in doing it, which again negates the need for an arbitrary hard limit. The final word I want to say about this arbitrary hard limit is the arbitrary hard limit doesn't understand what dedicated hunters and dedicated sport shooters actually use their firearms for at all. This is probably the most important part of this counter argument. There are people that hunt in different biomes, different types of game, different circumstances, different terrain. I'm not a competent hunter, right? So excuse my layperson's use of terminology, but I can easily see how a dedicated hunter would need 5 to 10 different rifles depending upon the activities they participate in. It's the same thing for sport shooters. There are guys out there that can easily motivate 5 to 10 different pistols just based on what they're participating in. That's just pistols. Then you add to that shotguns, add to it semi-auto rifles, and if the person has a financial means to afford it, it's very, very easy for them to legitimately motivate a need for 10, 15, 20 plus guns without even breaking a sweat. And this isn't even talking about the collectors yet. In closing, the arbitrary limit imposed by the previous proposed amendments to the Firearms Control Act of 2000 ignore the realities regarding how the system presently works, the safeguards and the checks and balances already inherent to that system, the legitimate needs of the people participating in the activities, where they own the number of firearms they do, and how they motivate the need for those firearms. And lastly, it also ignores the far-fetched nature of the concerns regarding why it would be undesirable to the state or to civil society for individuals to own a greater number of guns than X or Y, right? I think if we're going to have intelligent conversations about the direction of so-called firearm legislation in South Africa, we cannot afford to get bogged down in arbitrary nonsense like this, because it shifts the entire tone of the conversation from one of mature rationality into immature, irrational, normative thinking that doesn't positively engage with reality. I hope this has been somewhat informative. If you want to know more about this topic, let me know in the comment section below. Have a safe weekend and see you all again soon. Cheers.